On this video series of the 5R's of how you fix a cell to get well, but also how you detox a cell ultimately to get your life back. Look, this is the last R. This is R5, which is reestablishing methylation. Some of you are familiar with, right? This is in vogue right now. The MTHFR genotype, the one that if you have this, you have trouble detoxing and these people get sick more often. Look, I'm not hung up on genes or these things called SNPs in the genes because I believe the bigger factor is what environmental stressors you actually have, which brings me back to R number 1, which is if we don't remove the stressors, the upstream causes, then we're dead in the water. We're never going to get our life back. So I talked about the hidden sources, right? I talked about mold, right? That most people are getting mold exposures that don't feel well. Oftentimes they don't know it and it's treated incorrectly. I talked about heavy metals. The big one there is many people recognize that heavy metals could be their problem, but they detox heavy metals for 3 months, 6 months, and they think that's it. When the fact is they're not doing it correctly and they're not getting it out of the brain and the deep tissue where really it matters. And that's really how I got my life back. Obviously, hidden infections are another big factor. Cavitations, root canals, these things are missed constantly and you will not get well. This may not even be the reason you got sick, but you won't get well unless you identify if you have one of these hidden infections. And a cone beam is a 3D x-ray that can determine that, which is new technology. Thank God for that. Saves a lot of lives. And I have a lot of stories about how people remove these infections, find their mold source, get the heavy metals out of their brain, and they get their life back. That's R1. R2 is regenerating the cell membranes. Critical. This is, and I'm just going to review and bring this all back together. Here's the cell. You have to fix this to get well. That's this whole, what we're talking about here, the 5R's, right? This is the roadmap that I teach doctors on what they need to do to really make an impact, a lasting impact on people. So the 5R's is now a roadmap that I believe everyone can understand to get your life back. Okay, so R1, we just reminded you what that is. R2 is this membrane. When this membrane becomes inflamed, you can't get the good things in the cell needed for health, energy, healing, but you can't get the toxins or the bad things out. This membrane becomes rigid, it becomes inflamed, it becomes non-functional. And go back and watch the video if you haven't. I talked about what fats, surprising fats, that are needed to get this membrane functioning. But here's the point, that membrane also impacts your genes. Now, I said I'm not into these SNPs and defining diseases by your gene. However, these genes can be turned on and off. That's why I'm not into the definition of you have this genotype or that. But I do recognize the science around what is called epigenetics. Well, when you look at that science, there's one part of the cell that matters most, and that's this membrane. The cell membrane has the ability to turn on or off these genes. So regenerating this cell membrane is critical for your genes. And then there's these inner membranes of where you make energy in your mitochondria. That's the ATP. These membranes have to be regenerated. Otherwise, you don't make enough energy. And I talked about the Gibbs free energy equation, whereas we have energy dropping. So we have a drop in energy, which is ATP. We have a drop in something called glutathione, which is how your cells get rid of these toxins naturally. And then you have an increase in more cellular inflammation. So that simple equation explains why most people don't feel well. Now, I will start this by saying an increase in toxins decreases the inflammation, decreases the glutathione, the cell's ability to detox itself, it increases inflammation. And this goes round and round. So that brings us to ultimately our number 3 is we have to reestablish this ATP in the cell. We can't reestablish it without fixing R number 2, which is regenerating the cell membrane, right? Because if you don't fix the membrane, you don't fix the energy, you don't fix the glutathione, which brings me to R4. You don't fix the inflammation. You have to reduce the inflammation of the cell. We can't do that unless we fix the membrane. We can't do that unless we fix the energy of the cell. If you fix the energy of the cell, now you can drop the inflammation. Which brings me to today's lesson is R number 5. See, they're all intertwined. You can see, but it all starts right here, doesn't it? It all starts with toxins. Okay, so R number 5 is reestablishing this thing called methylation. And believe it or not, it's as simple as a carbon and 3 hydrogens. That's what a methyl group is. I'm going to keep it very simple. As methylation drops, so does glutathione. And therefore inflammation increases, because glutathione, yes, it gets rid of the cells or the toxins in the cell, but it also controls inflammation. So there's a relationship between, I want to write it over here so you can see it. As methylation drops, so does the glutathione. And then therefore that equals an increase in inflammation. I don't know that you can see that. I think I wrote off the board there. But anyways, so methylation relates to glutathione, which relates to inflammation. So once again, all of the R's tie back in. All that to say, now I know that when you think about methylation, people think about B vitamins, etc. And yes, that's a part of it. And I'll even give you a clue. There's a product called MORS, M-O-R-S. There's 21 steps potentially in this methylation cycle that can go wrong. MORS was built around all 21 of those. So just taking B12 or folic acid is not going to reestablish your methylation. So this product is a better product. However, here's the point that I want to make. The point is that methylation ultimately is used to adapt to stress, physical, chemical, or emotional. So as you start to increase your stress levels, you start depleting methylation. So as the cell becomes more toxic, methylation goes down, glutathione goes down, inflammation goes up. You see the correlation? Let's bring it all the way back to R number 1. If we can decrease the toxicity, our toxic levels that we're taking into our body, now we have a chance to fix everything. However, if we don't regenerate the membranes, we're never going to get the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. If we don't raise the cellular energy, we're never going to detox, because as cellular energy drops, so does the cell's ability to detox. Okay, so as stress levels go up, toxin levels go up, this thing called methylation drops, so does the cell's ability to detox. So what I'm telling you is this: all of these things have to be addressed ultimately to win the battle, to fix the cell, to get well. I wish I could in one lesson give you how we do that with every art. I gave you tips and biohacks along the way of what we do. But I'll tell you a story. Look, my wife, she started getting some different hormone problems. And for a while we didn't know what was going on, and we were trying many things. I ran a hormone test. It's called a 24-hour urine hormone. And in that test, it showed R number 5. It showed a decrease in her methylation, which showed an increase of the toxic forms of hormones. Like it's a certain form of estrogen. It's a toxic form that leads to cancer, breast cancer. It's 4-hydroxyestro, and it was raising. And when that gets to a certain point too long, yeah, your risk of breast cancer goes up dramatically. And her mother ended up with breast cancer and ultimately uterine cancer, which ended up taking her life. My wife was literally heading down that same direction, symptom-wise and obviously hormonally. So we, like most people, were trying to raise her methylation, It just wasn't working. I mean, some things may have helped, but ultimately it wasn't until we did a lead test. And like her mother, her lead was off the chart high. By the way, the number one source of lead is mom in utero. That's where you inherit it, and then it will come out at different times later in life, like it did my wife. The bottom line is this: as we got rid of her lead levels, magically, she started improving on her methylation. Therefore, once methylation raised, the body was able to get rid of that toxic form of estrogen, which would have caused a bigger problem. So the point is that R number 1 applied to the rest of the R's. Now I want to show you something that is really important. So here's the cell, And here's where these 5R's that I've been teaching you on. I have 3 points that I want to make about detox. Number one, it has to be at the cell. If we don't upregulate that membrane, if we don't fix the energy in the cell, if we don't reduce that inflammation and reestablish the methylation, then we're not going to have anything that lasts. The cell has to get rid of toxins day in, day out, even from the very energy it makes. That's the 5R's. Rewatch the videos again. Okay, once we start getting the cell to detox, okay, and I'll just draw little X's for the toxins, then what happens is we have to move them all the way out of the body. One of the places that the toxins make their way to is the liver. And I just drew a little gallbladder on there because in the liver, many of the toxins get bound to bile. That's B-I-L-E. Bile is a fat component that is used to digest fat. So it's like a degreaser, if you will, but the toxins end up binding in the bile. So as the toxins move to the liver, therefore to get brought out of the body, many of them bind into the bile. And then they end up getting dumped into our gut. Okay, so this is our gut, this is our liver, and from here through the bile, they end up getting dumped into the gut. How? Because when you eat fat, you need bile for the digestion and it's brought into the intestine. Here's the problem. The toxins, I'll draw them again, most of which are in this bile complex, in the lower intestine, the body is designed to reabsorb the bile back to the liver so it doesn't have to recreate it. But what does it bring with it? It brings these toxins right back around. That's called auto-intoxication. So part of what real detox is using real binders in the right places so we don't auto-intoxicate. It happens in 2 places, right here in the gut. So here we use a product called Bind. It has 4 different binders that stay in the gut and act as a catcher's mitt. So when you take this toxic bile complex and dump it in the gut, it grabs it and pulls it all the way out of the body. It's critical. And most people make the mistake. Look, Chlorella doesn't do this. It's not strong enough. It's not a real binder. Charcoals are not strong enough and most of them are contaminated. Many people are trying different products, but the fact is that most of them are not real binders and strong enough to bring it out. So number 1 is, I'll write it here, that we don't get to the cell. We don't upregulate cell function. Number 2, we're not using real binders. Is the second big problem in detox, okay? We also need a binder here that when we upregulate the cell function, we need a vehicle to make sure that the toxins even make it to the liver because most end up going elsewhere. And you know where they end up? They end up in the brain. If that's a person, that's the mouth. They end up in your brain because if they don't make it all the way out of the body, they redistribute, they recycle. And the example I like to give is like a street cleaner. It goes down the street, you see this plume of dust going everywhere, on cars, around everywhere but where it should be, right? Our tax dollars actually pay for that. But what happens is when people do these cheap detoxes with weak binders, things like Chlorella and cilantro and herbal binders, they're not strong binders, and all they do is act like street cleaners and pick it up, the dust, and throw it around the body, and many of which end up crossing deeper into the brain. So we need to use real binders up here, one of which we use is called Cyto Detox. I'll just put Cyto, but it has particles that grab onto these toxins once they come out of the cell, and they don't let go, and they can make it all the way out of the body. But again, the next pitfall is when it binds to the bile in the liver, gets dumped in the gut, and then we bring it around and around only to auto-intoxicate. And again, many can make it into deeper tissue like the brain. So therefore, doing IV chelation and these weak herbal binders, it doesn't work. We need to use real binders in the gut, in the cell, that don't let go to make sure it pulls it all the way out of the body. And we have to upregulate cell function. If we don't fix the cell, we're not going to get well. So we have to keep that going while we're using real binders. Okay, third, I ran out of room here, but third is we're not keeping open downstream detox pathways. So I'll just put downstream detox pathways. I ran out of room, but we know that says pathways. So the third pitfall is not keeping the liver open, not keeping the gut open, and not keeping, I'll draw some banana-like kidneys over here. Yeah, I know, I'm a great artist. And I'll draw some lymph tissue over here. I don't even know how to draw lymph tissue. I don't think anybody does. But anyways, we'll just call this lymph. We'll call these kidneys. Okay, and we want to keep the gut open for sure, the liver open. These are all downstream detox pathways. So another pitfall in detox is not keeping these pathways open. And again, I teach many strategies on this. There's a great product that I love just called L-Liver. There's a product called K-Kidney just to keep it simple, to give you some hints, the things to use. But there's many different tools we use to do that. And of course, my fasting strategies is another huge way that we keep these pathways open. But look, there's three things. And I'm going to add a fourth if I only had room, and that's not getting to the brain. I'll just put not getting deep enough. So we're looking at most detox as very superficial. But the fact is that in my detox that I teach, there's a prep phase where we open up these downstream detox pathways and just get the cell moving. That's called a preparatory phase. Then we move into what is called a body phase, to where we start to get the easy to get toxins, to set up concentration gradient from deeper concentration or higher concentration of toxins, they move to a lower concentration. And that phase is really just to set up that concentration. So ultimately, we can get to the toxins where they really are causing us the problem. And that's in the brain and deep nerve tissue. So that's the third phase, the brain phase. And that's the phase that most people miss, is that brain phase. When we look at research, yes, the toxins make their way into the cells, but specifically, once they get their way into the brain and the nerves, that's where we start really developing the symptoms that people just shrug their shoulders at. The brain fog, right? Nothing's helping my energy anymore. I can't even lose weight. I mean, all of that stuff. The control tower for all your hormones, by the way, sits right in the center of the brain. Studies show that's where most of the mercury goes, actually, is the pituitary hypothalamus that regulates your hormones. So when we look at why people don't feel well, this is the reason why. They're not getting to the cell, and more importantly, they're not getting to where the real problem is, and that's in the brain that ultimately controls everything in your body, even your digestion. I hope this helps. And look, I don't expect to do a quick video like this, but I want you to see, number one, that there's hope. Number two, there's a different way and a specific way. And I've been blessed to teach doctors around the world these concepts. Keep watching on all my channels. My website, drpompa.com. I do Cellular Healing TV, where I interview experts and other experts on these topics that I love, but where you can find out more. And also, I offer coaching, where I'm coaching not just doctors around the world, but people that have been everywhere, tried everything. I offer group coaching, and I still do individual coaching. But if you go there and you go to coaching on my website, and maybe I'll even put a link here below, we can help you out with more of these type of lessons. Hope that helps.